You won't believe what happens in this story, so stick with me until the end, because the twist will leave you stunned, maybe even inspired. If you're new here, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because stories like this will make you feel every emotion in the book. Now, let me take you inside a courtroom where arrogance meets quiet strength, and where a single dad veteran proves that true honor isn't worn on a badge, but carried in the heart. The man in uniform strutted into the courthouse with his chest puffed out, his shiny badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. To him, it wasn't just a badge, it was a shield, a weapon, and a crown all rolled into one. He had built a reputation in the small town as the cop who always got his way, bending laws, intimidating defendants, and making sure his word was the last word. People feared him, not because he was just, but because he was untouchable, or so he thought. Across the room, sitting quietly in a worn jacket and tie that looked like it had been folded at the bottom of a drawer for years, was Daniel Harper, a single dad, a veteran, and a man who never sought the spotlight. He wasn't there for glory or revenge. He was there because he had no choice. His little girl, Emma, was counting on him. The officer, Lieutenant Briggs, had written up Daniel on a false charge after a heated encounter one night outside a grocery store. Daniel had simply stood up for a struggling mother being harassed by Briggs, and that act of courage had turned him into a target. Now, Briggs smirked from across the courtroom, already imagining how the trial would play out. He had lawyers in his pocket, a polished speech prepared, and years of intimidation backing him up. To him, Daniel was just another nobody, just a tired single dad with too many bills and too little influence. What he didn't know was that Daniel had spent years in combat zones, where truth wasn't twisted in courtrooms but lived and died on the battlefield. He had seen real power, real corruption, and real justice. He knew how to stand his ground even when the odds were stacked sky high. As the case began, the prosecution leaned hard into Briggs' story. They painted Daniel as aggressive, unstable, and even dangerous, all lies carefully framed to make Briggs look like the hero. But Daniel sat still, his hands folded, eyes calm. Emma was in the back row, clutching her small backpack with her favorite stuffed bear peeking out, whispering, "Daddy's gonna be okay." Her faith in him was unshakable, and that gave him strength. When it was Daniel's turn, the court expected him to stumble, to break under pressure, to look small against the system. Instead, he rose with the quiet authority of a man who had once stood before commanding officers and carried the lives of his brothers in arms on his shoulders. His voice didn't shake. His words didn't falter. Piece by piece, he dismantled the prosecution's claims, not with anger, but with clarity. He produced evidence that Briggs hadn't counted on, security footage from a nearby shop that showed exactly what happened that night. The courtroom gasped as the video played. It wasn't Daniel who was aggressive. It wasn't Daniel who started the fight. It was Briggs, the untouchable officer, shoving, threatening, and abusing his authority. Daniel had only stepped in to protect a woman and her child. Briggs' face went pale. His badge suddenly seemed smaller, almost like a toy clutched by a child pretending to be powerful. The judge, who had rolled her eyes at Daniel at first, leaned forward now, her tone sharpening. "Lieutenant Briggs, do you have an explanation for this?" she demanded. But there was none. The courtroom was no longer his playground. The verdict came swift and strong. Daniel was cleared of all charges, his name restored, his honor intact. But the story didn't end there. The judge announced an internal investigation into Briggs' conduct, and whispers spread through the courthouse that his reign of fear was finally over. Daniel didn't celebrate like others might have. Instead, he turned to Emma, lifted her up into his arms, and kissed her forehead. "We did it, sweetheart," he whispered. "Truth always wins." Emma grinned, her eyes sparkling. "I knew you would, Daddy." The courtroom emptied, but the message lingered in the air. You don't need a badge, a title, or a position to stand for what's right. Sometimes, all it takes is courage, honesty, and the determination of a single dad who refuses to let his child see him bow to injustice. So if this story moved you, remember, it's not the power on your chest that makes you untouchable, it's the strength in your heart. Like this video if you believe truth still matters, subscribe for more inspiring stories, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that integrity always wins in the end. Because sometimes the quietest voices in the room turn out to be the most powerful.